Hello. Progress on the BMC FG die-cast model conversion. Last time I was looking at the chassis, the motor and all that sort of gubbins. We have progressed somewhat since then. However, I did power it up and with variable speed I found that the motor, which was this sort of motor, 10mm planetary gearbox, nominally about 120 RPM at 5 volts, very nominal, but it's a single stage planetary gearbox in these, but a bigger motor. I found that this particular one, or this particular batch certainly, wouldn't start smoothly enough, and it required more power to start than was appropriate. So I then took the decision to take the motor out, break it free, which of course, simply being epoxied into milliput, it's quite easy to do. I just broke the motor out and replaced it with one of my K20 motors. I've not painted it up simply so it can all be seen. That was a nuisance to do, simply because I'd done all the electrics and I had mounted the on-off switch in this zone, so I had to move the on-off switch. This is the on-off switch here. That would be on, that would be off. And then of course carve out another section to mount the on-off switch in, which, as I say, is there, before I could do things like actually fit the motor. Fitting the motor itself was dead easy, and I was surprised how easy it was to fit one of these nylon gears to the K12. It just required sleeving the gear with a bit of 2mm OD brass, and then reaming and then cutting that off in the lathe, so shortening it as I did the last one, so shortening it to that sort of thickness because length is a problem, and then using these really useful little tools, I then just opened out the sleeve, the 2mm OD sleeve, to a nice fit on the 1.4mm drive shaft of the motor. The sleeve is a press fit with cyanoacrylate with super glue into the gear. As I say, it was then cut off, and then I used Loctite, and I think it's Loctite 601. Hang on just a second. Yep, Loctite 601, the teeniest drop on the inside of the gear sleeve, and pushed it on, and so the gear is Loctited on, and it's running beautifully true and lovely and square and all that. So that's not an issue anymore. It may be that the mesh is a bit tight. There's not a lot of play there. It's helpful if there's a little bit of movement, bit of slap and tickle, because that means the gears aren't very tight and they'll be more forgiving, because one has to remember that these nylon gears are moulded, they're not cut. The brass gears are cut, and a very pleasant fine job they are, and so they mesh absolutely beautifully. These nylon gears being moulded just require a little bit more slack to work smoothly. So we've now got the K20 motor in there with the original nylon gears. I could of course have replaced the gears with the brass ones, but I chose not to. I chose to stick with the nylon ones. The on-off switch is now fitted in this zone, accessible from underneath while still being fairly invisible. The charging socket I've located here. Sadly, I have painted it black. It's one of those teeny 2-pin, I think they're about 2.25 mil between pins or something like that. I bought a packet of them off eBay a long time ago, and they're good for this sort of thing. However, the wires from them are a single core steel, so they won't stand very much flexing. But that's fine in this application because that's just firmly glued there on the body, so I can just plug straight in there, and the wire is run through and under the engine cover, if you like, and down, one to the switch and the other to the negative there, which is going to wire to the battery. So one of these two wires goes to the charging socket, and the other goes to the receiver and the servo. Now, the receiver, I've just managed to tuck in this slot underneath the floor detail here. There's just enough room to slide it in, and it seems happy enough there. So, although actually the servo does stick out the side, the engine cowl painted black, you really can't see it, so that'll be fine. I've not connected the servo arm to the stub axle yet because I don't want to damage it. I'll do that later. So actually that is all the gubbins of the chassis, apart from the steering hooked up, as I say, all neatly contained. Motor, gearbox there, invisible receiver. I'm using the Deltang RX41 in there. Charging socket, on-off switch, and this here is the live to the battery, and that is a 500 milliamp resettable fuse. So if I do get a short circuit, instead of drawing current from the battery and causing it to overheat and causing an explosion or fire or what have you, this will very quickly start drawing more than its rated 500 milliamp and cut out and break the short circuit, as it were. Now, I forget how much these are from Micron. They're about 50p or something, and as you can see, they're really, really small, so there's no excuse not to fit them. I can fit them in just about anything, so I do. I think they're absolutely brilliant. So that is the chassis. That's where we are with the FG. You can see it's now right-hand drive, not a left-hand drive. Lots of lovely articulation. Everything's hunky-dory with that. The cab I did a little bit on. There were white marker lights on either side of the cab. I couldn't find any photographs of a British one with those lights. I assumed it was a little Continental detail, So I pulled those out and filled that, which in turn meant the roof had to be painted. Dye, my wife chose brown to go with the yellow. This is quite nice Halford's brown. It's a Rover something or other brown, very nice. And I sprayed it and all went well, and then it lifted all the paint, all the yellow paint and black paint off the front of all this, and I thought, oh no. But in fact, I've managed to clean it off and brush paint it back in, so it's saved. But in future, this being an unusually delicate paint, let's say, I would use Humbrol or something more innocuous. I have, of course, used the aerosols on models of this nature many times before and absolutely not had a problem. So this was just a tad unfortunate, but it's not worth the risk. I've also taken the old windscreen wipers off. These are the old windscreen wipers, and just replaced them with something that I think is a little bit less glaring. These are just laser cut out of Trotec, 0.5mm thick, so they're not too bad. I have some orange acrylic sheet here, and I propose to make some slightly nicer indicator lenses than we have on this at the present. That'll be a nice little job to do, but that'll be interesting at any rate. So the cab, once I've adapted and painted a driver, the cab will be able to go on like that. It's sat on that wiring at the moment, so I need to adjust that, but that'll basically be that. And then we've got the body. Now this is actually the second body. I made one out of 2mm MDF, laser cut MDF, but it was just a bit heavy, a bit too heavy aesthetically, so I've redone it out of 1mm ply, again all laser cut and with acrylic irons for detail. The framing here was all done with 2mm MDF, and this black bit, of course, is the remains of the plastic tipper frame that I just sawed in half and thinned down to give me room. Now it also wants light boards and number plate, so I've cut those in acrylic and put holes in, and I've just fitted LEDs in there. These are 1.8mm LEDs. This one, of course, will take the number plate as well, and I'll mug up some sort of indicator lens on each side to go outside of those. The LEDs, if we can see, are epoxied in at the back, and they are wired in parallel, and then I have got a 2.2 kilo ohm resistor on the positive. Doesn't matter which side, but it is in fact the positive, because the feed from the receiver, the signal from the receiver, goes to the negative. And let us just carefully put some volts through that. Oh. So these things are a fiddle. You may or may not get to see. I don't want to short the battery out, obviously. So positive to positive, and then yeah, you can see that flashing with the intermittent contact. And of course my next job will to be paint the back sides of all that black so we don't get any light leaking through there. If I'm messing about with the battery like that, as soon as I finish with it I always insulate terminals so I don't get a short circuit, because that's when things get nasty and dangerous. So the battery itself will fit very neatly in there, and then there'll be a very, very thin false floor that sits on top of that, and nobody will be any the wiser. And from underneath it'll be invisible as well, because it's no lower than the framework. That's the joy of these very thin batteries. This is a 650 watt battery, and that will last in excess of 2 days exhibition use, which is more than enough between recharges, that is. So that will finish the body off. So that's kind of where we are with the FG. That's where we're looking at it. And it'll be a nice little model, or it will be finished and weathered up at any rate. I came back to these motors, and they're interesting little things. And it's worth having a look inside these, if we can. I'm just going to zoom in if I can remember how. Yeah. Bear with me. Right. Now, this bit of plastic here, the whole grey thing, is the output shaft. And so when I fit these gears to them, by the time the glue has hardened, it forms a cross that matches that. And this is one I've already had on here and pried it back off. Now, if I can see, seeing is always a problem for me. Right, so there's a tab, one on each side, very, very small tab. And what I'm going to do is just pry underneath it like that and release it, and then 180 degrees the other side, do exactly the same, and that has released the gearbox. The output shaft from the motor has a flat on it. It's a little D, very, very small, and then the gearbox itself is this little baby. Now this outer case also acts as a bearing surface for the final stage of the gearbox. So this here is the final stage of the gearbox, and this runs in the inside the black case. Now what I've done with this now is just put a dab of lubricant, silicone lubricant, in there to help it run a bit more freely, because of course it it's been running dry. Now if we split this, you'll see what we've got. That is simply struggling to see. Bring that closer. Yeah. That's not only a retaining ring, but in there you can see, you may be able to see, gear teeth, internal gear teeth. Oh, do excuse me, my doorbell's gone. I'll be back in a second. Sorry for the interruption. Right, we have this gear motor taken into half at the moment. The motor has a D shaft, very small steel shaft with a flat on it just protruding. You can probably just about see that. And that teeny little shaft drives the gearbox. This is a planetary gearbox. It's a single stage planetary gearbox. And yeah, you can see that's all there is to it. And we'll pop it out and see what it is we've got. Okay, so first things first, we know that this grey bit with the cross is the output shaft, and that is just running in this black case. So this black case is actually the final bearing for the output drive, which is fine. There's a fair amount of surface area, but it isn't just a case, it's also functioning as a bearing. The gearbox itself we can pull apart, pull the back off, and this back you may be able to see on the inner ring there are teeth, very, very fine, tiny teeth, and those teeth engage these planet gears here. There are 3 planet gears. It's not very clear because they're all white, but there are 3 arranged in a triangle which engage on both the front and back half of the outer case. The inner edge of these planet gears is, if I can bear with me, no, I'll let me just take that out. Oh, that's perhaps a clearer view of the teeth that are engaged by this nice cage of planet gears. There we go. You might be able to see that very, very small spline shaft, which acts as a drive shaft from the motor. So the motor shaft locates in the back of this little plastic thing, and then there is a spline on here, and that spline engages in the center of this nest of gears. So as the motor rotates, it spins that thing, which rotates in the center of these gears and forces these gears to rotate. And because they are in a toothed cage externally, it then forces the whole lot to rotate as well. Sorry, this is very fine. I'm going to put it back before I lose it. There we go. So that's how small and delicate this is. As I say, this is a single stage planetary gearbox, and just assemble it by feel. We wouldn't want to get any dirt in here. Any dirt in something like this would probably just finish it. There you are, that's nestled nicely in there. And then the back half of the cage does something similar. Lovely, that's all closed up in there. And then we've got the lovely job of lining up the shaft, the motor shaft. Can't even see where the flat is. So flipping small. Somewhere around there. Line it up with the tabs. So it's going to go in somewhere. Oh, yes, just like that. So that's actually engaged on the motor, and that's fine. Now, earlier I did put some grease both inside that cage and inside this outer case. Not a lot, but hopefully enough to make a little bit of difference. Let me pop this on and just click that on, and that's the thing, rebuilt, re-engaged. And that runs a little bit freer than it did before. So it may be that these things need a little bit of attention before they run at their best. Don't know, we'll see. This is the stuff I've put in there. It's a micro lube grease enhanced with PTFE. Micro gear grease. I can't remember where I got it from. It's the sort of thing that's worth Googling for, if nothing else. So that's the story on these motors. The K20, much smaller motor. It's only an 8mm by 6mm motor. This is a 10mm by 8mm motor. So it's a much smaller motor comparatively, but that has a two-stage planetary gearbox. So it's exactly the same principle, but there's two of those cages, one after the other. The first one driven by the motor, and then the first cage drives the second cage. So you've got a double stage reduction, which maximizes the power output of these very small motors. So that, of course, is why you get such extraordinary performance out of these magic little motors. It's down to the two-stage gearbox. Now, these motors aren't made anymore at the moment. Whether they ever will be again, I don't know. It's one of those things you kind of need to buy these things when you find them. They're obviously made by the hundreds of thousands for a specific job, and when that job's done, the manufacturer moves on to something else, and we've all been buying the surplus. And when it comes to an end, it comes to an end. There are pockets of these motors still available. I have recently found some available from Alibaba. No, not Alibaba, AliExpress or whatever it is. That marketplace in China. And I've ordered some from there. I very much hope they arrive. If anyone is wanting to buy any from there, assuming they're still available, these have a 151 reduction ratio. That's the way of knowing. 151.1, I think it is, reduction ratio, and a nominal 90 RPM output at 3.7 volts, I think it is. It's somewhere around that. But if you're into this sort of thing, seriously, it's worth trying to find a couple. I've got these in a couple of 7mm narrow gauge locos, which don't need to go very much more than shunting speed, certainly not mainline speed, but you know, a nice narrow gauge speed, and they're wonderful. And of course, being such a small motor, they draw very, very little current as well, but immensely powerful. Weight of a big heavy white metal loco simply isn't a problem or an issue. So first class motors, and I rather mourn their passing. And it'd be lovely if either these or something similar get produced again. We'll see. Nice model. All these things tend to turn out to be a little bit more of a faff than you'd think when you start. But there we go, that's all right. Oh, one teeny little thing with the FG, if one's ever planning on converting one. What I have done is just cut the mudguard moulding and split it to widen the mudguards, because the mudguards were aesthetically too far in, and it was visibly too far in. I did much the same on the TK Arctic, I think it was. I can't remember. Well, certainly, yeah, the TK Arctic, I needed to do the same, and the TK Tipper, of course, I had to reduce the whole width of the rear axle to scale, because it's overscaled for a rigid. So that's the job so far. Best of luck if anyone is going to do any of these conversions. They are great fun to do. Might be a bit frustrating. They're a learning curve, as we all know. That's the second 4mm TK on its way. I need to get another receiver to finish that. It's ready for its receiver. Lights are in, resistors, the gear motor in. It's funny, isn't it? Same gear motor as even the big vehicles, and axle all there, nicely finished. So yeah, just waiting upon a new receiver for that job. Right, and that'll do for the moment. Best of luck.